Hi, I'm Dr. Harlan Mittag. I'd like to talk to you very quickly about vitamin D3 and COVID. So vitamin D3 is a phenomenal thing to take in our current situation. I'm talking to you on November 13th, 2020. Here's a graph of the rising number of cases of COVID in the United States. And here is a graph of the rising hospitalizations, and given the rising number of infections, this is going to rise even more. So this is important information. Now, this information doesn't supersede social distancing, wearing masks, and hopefully the vaccine will be coming very soon. But in the meantime, maybe there are some things that we can do to help our immune system so that if we're infected, we don't fare as badly. There are things that you can do things that you can avoid to make sure that your immune system is stronger. Things like avoiding smoking, avoiding alcohol, avoiding empty calories in the SAD diet or the standard American diet, avoiding processed foods, eating a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables to get good nutrition, minimizing stress levels as much as possible, getting good sleep every night, getting a little bit of exercise on a very regular basis, avoiding overexercise. All of these things will help boost your immunity. But again, today I want to talk about just one nutrient, vitamin D, because it is so effective in supporting the immune system, specifically when it comes to COVID. And long story short, if you just want to know, okay, how much, you want to be taking 5,000 IUs vitamin D3 per day through the wintertime. That's the summation of this whole presentation. If you want more detail and some really convincing information on why you need to do that and why it's so vital that you do that, then continue to listen and I'll show you some studies and give you a lot more information. Here's one study. This study came out actually early on in April of this year, 2020, and it looked at 212 COVID-infected patients, and these patients were divided into 4 groups depending on the severity of their COVID infection. There was a critical group. These were people that suffered respiratory failure. There were 48 people in this group. There was a severe group. These people experienced respiratory distress and oxygen levels lower than 93%, 56 people in this group. There was an, quote, ordinary group. These people had confirmed pneumonia and fever and other respiratory symptoms. There were 59 people in this group. And then there was a mild group, mild clinical symptoms and no pneumonia. So you get 212 people infected, and they all have different outcomes. And so the researchers wanted to look and see, okay, do vitamin D levels correlate with their outcomes? Can we learn anything from this? This is the data that they found out. Now what they did is they arbitrarily assigned a level of vitamin D of 30 in the blood as their marker of deficient versus normal vitamin D. And so anything over 30 was considered normal or sufficient, and anything under 30 was considered deficient. So here's some stark results. You see that in the critical, severe, and ordinary, meaning the more severe groups, the vitamin D levels, many more of the people, virtually all of the people, meaning all of the people up here who are missing in these groups, they were deficient in vitamin D. Only 4 people in the critical group had sufficient vitamin D, only 4 people in the severe group, and only 7 people in the ordinary group had ordinary levels of vitamin D, whereas 86 people and nearly 90% of the people in the mild group had normal vitamin D, suggesting that normal vitamin D levels are strongly associated with better outcome in COVID infection. Here's another data plot. It shows the death rate from COVID on the left here. So as this red line drops, the number of deaths drops. And as this line progresses across here, the level of vitamin D increases. So the level of death dropped to 0 at 33.5 level of vitamin D in the blood, whereas at a level of 17 vitamin D in the blood, the percent of death was 100%. When people are hospitalized with COVID, there are two trajectories. One is you get support, meaning you might get some oxygen, you get some IV fluids, you get other medications, antivirals and so forth that are shown to work. Or some people end up in ICU in severe respiratory distress. And this is really what we want to avoid, is the severe outcome. There was a study done in Cordoba, Spain. This study was done in October 2020. There were 76 people in the study, 45 men, 31 women. They averaged an age of 53. As these people came into the hospital, they were divided into two groups, not on the basis of how they were looking or feeling in terms of COVID, but just randomly. So one of the groups then received vitamin D, whereas the other group did not. And the group that received vitamin D was twice as large as the group that didn't. So there were 50 people in the vitamin D group and only 26 in the control group. But they wanted to see basically, if you give vitamin D, does it in any way seem to improve the outcome of these patients? And here are the results. So here's the no vitamin D group, and here's the vitamin D group. This is the percentage of the total on the graph here. And so of the group that didn't receive vitamin D when they came in, 50% of them remained normal standard care, meaning they didn't get worse, they didn't end up in the ICU. But 50% did end up in ICU, and 8% of them died. So 8% of the 26 who were in this group died with no vitamin D. There's a stark difference between this group and the group that received vitamin D. In the group that received vitamin D, all but one person stayed out of the ICU. Just one person entered the ICU. So what this suggests is that the people that received vitamin D fared much better, didn't go into acute respiratory distress as a result of COVID infection. We know that vitamin D helps a whole slew of different conditions. The average level of vitamin D in the United States and Canada is 25, and that's reflected by this green line going up and down here. This is the vitamin D level across the top here, so it starts at 6 and goes to 68. On the side here, you see a number of different health conditions that have all been shown to be affected by vitamin D levels in the blood, in the sense that when the vitamin D levels are higher than the average level of 25 in the US and Canadian populations, when you increase vitamin D levels above that average, you decrease the risk of these conditions by different degrees. And it's based on this is just a compilation of all of the research and the decreased risk associated with increased levels of vitamin D for these different conditions. So we'll just look at one here. With heart attacks for men, the the risk of a heart attack for a man in the United States or Canada is reduced by 30% when their vitamin D levels are up at 34, 35, as compared to men who are at level 25, 26. Let's do another one. Here's fractures, all fractures combined. When you compare the risk for a fracture in the average population at 25 level vitamin D, if your vitamin D is up to 38, 39, you have reduced your risk for a fracture by 25%. If you get it up to 45, vitamin D level of 45, you have reduced your risk of a fracture by 50%, according to clinical studies. So here's the range of vitamin D levels in the United States by percentage. 23% of people in the US are less than 20, 39% between 20 and 29, 25% between 30 and 39. Only 13% of people in the United States are above 40, which, when you look at this range, this higher range here, where you're getting all of this benefit of the decreased risk of these different conditions by getting your vitamin D level up, we want it up between 40 and 60. And in the United States, only 13% of people have their vitamin D levels up above 40%, above a reading of 40. So we know that vitamin D is synthesized by exposure to the sun. UV light reacts with molecules in the skin, and then the vitamin D precursor is metabolized in the liver and in the kidneys to create its active form. So, in other words, we need sun exposure to make vitamin D. What happens when you're not exposed to the sun? Here's the reflection of data from a study in southern Germany, population in southern Germany, where they measured vitamin D levels in a small population in southern Germany through the year, from August to August. And you see that in the wintertime, between November and April, in this range, vitamin D levels drop significantly because of decreased exposure to UV light in the sun. Well, Germany, southern Germany, is at a latitude of 45. I live in Minnesota. Here's latitude 45 for the middle of Minnesota. So these results are reflective of what is happening in Minnesota as well. Now, it's no coincidence that when vitamin D levels drop in the wintertime, that's when we get the flu. And as the immune system is depleted for lack of vitamin D, we are more prone to infections. And there are other factors for sure, but it is now thought that this drop in vitamin D is one of the big reasons that the flu is seasonal. And other supporting evidence of that is if you look in the southern hemisphere, the flu season is in our summertime, their wintertime. So the flu season in the southern hemisphere also corresponds to their drop in exposure to UV light and the manufacture of vitamin D. Here's one more representation of how diminished UV exposure in the wintertime diminishes our capacity to produce vitamin D. So the remedy then, at least in the wintertime, for us and for, I believe, all year long, but particularly in the wintertime, the remedy is to take a supplement of vitamin D. That's really how you're going to get your vitamin D levels up to these healthy levels where you have boosted immune function and reduced risk for all of those conditions. And we want it between 40 and 60. What this study shows is they followed 9,014 people who had their blood level of vitamin D tested. At the same time, they were taking a particularly level of vitamin D supplementation. So you can see that if someone was taking between 2,000 and 4,000 IUs of vitamin D a day, on average, their vitamin D level in their blood was 42. If you up that from 4,000 to 6,000, the average increased to 51. Because we want our vitamin D levels between 42 and 62, we want our supplements to be between 2,000 and 10,000 IUs a day. If you're bigger, you want a higher level. If you're smaller, more petite, you want a lower level. I recommend that people take, right in here, about 5,000 IUs a day in the wintertime. You're not going to get any high doses. There's very little, almost zilch risk of any toxicity, even at these higher levels, and certainly at this 5,000 level, there's no risk of toxicity. What I recommend is vitamin D3, 5,000 IUs. It's very inexpensive. If a typical supplement, $11.40 for a 4-month supply, that comes out to 9 cents a day. Another thing you can do is you can have your vitamin D level tested. That's easy to do. There are kits that you can do at home and send them in, and you'll get your vitamin D level. If you want to know anything about that, or if you're interested in a vitamin D supplement, there's information about that on this page. I want to thank you. Take your vitamin D. Take it from now until the end of March at least. And it's very important for your health. Thank you.